One of the most striking and peculiar conditions of our times is that the President of the United States is more able to kill people in the Arab world than he is to help people in his own country. While at home, he's blocked and challenged at every turn, President Obama has a permanent green light to send missiles, jets, and drones almost anywhere in the Muslim world.
I have decided that the United States should take military action against Syrian regime targets.
But bombs and bullets don't always win hearts and minds. To do that, you have to talk to the people most affected. But Obama hasn't spoken to the Arab media since 2009. We're here to try to find out why.
I think it's a failure. It's a failure on his administration.
And to see what responses we can eke out of those who shape and deliver the president's message.
We believe in the virtue of transparency and the value of transparency.
We're speaking with journalists from Russia, China, Australia, India, and Europe. And unlike Obama, with the Arab media too. How do their experiences differ from American journalists like Jim Risen?
The government's been after me for quite a while for some of my reporting.
We'll go into the corridors of power and speak to former White House press secretaries and get the view of the media from the inside looking out.
Journalism, to some extent, has become, kids chasing the soccer ball.
Finally, we'll step back outside to discover if tomorrow's journalists still have the ideals and dreams about delivering the truth to the world.
Do you report the story that needs to be told, or do you report the story that people are paying you to write?
There's a lot of demands on the president's time, and we recognize that, and we want him to have as many opportunities to get his message out there as possible. Whether that is talking to Arab television, whether that is talking to American television, we value the power of that message, and we do as much as we can.
In the beginning were the words.
Assalamu alaikum.
Delivered from Cairo, they were heard across the Muslim world.
Mr. Obama is a brave president.
What Mr. Obama said when he addressed the Muslim world was very good.
President Obama is balanced, and I can see a lot of benefits for the world and the American people because of his policies.
He went to the heart of the Middle East and said, "Here I am. I'm coming to extend my hand to you."
But when the honeymoon was over, Arab journalists were left to ponder.
What next?
The answer, almost 6 years later, has been not much. After sitting down with the pan-Arab news channel Al Arabiya in his first week in office in 2009 and declaring that
my job to the Muslim world is to communicate that the Americans are not your enemy,
President Obama has since failed to sit down with an Arab journalist. Even his own Secretary of State saw the power of Arab media.
Al Jazeera has been the leader in that are literally changing people's minds and attitudes. And like it or hate it, it is really effective.
So we sat down with Al Arabiya correspondent Nadia Belbassi and Al Jazeera's Washington bureau chief Abdurrahim Fukara, who have interviewed presidents and prime ministers and U.S. top brass to try and understand why. You've done 6 interviews with President Bush, 0 interviews with President Obama, even though your colleague did 1 in the very beginning of the Obama administration. How do you explain that?
I think President Obama in the beginning had one major problem, and that was called President Bush. And therefore, he went to Cairo. He wanted to address the Arab public and to tell them, I am not him. Then the President Obama was surrounded by people from the campaign who didn't really understand the nuances of how to reach directly to your audience in the Arab world, especially that all the foreign policy of President Obama is in the Arab world.
Right.
And I think it's a failure. It's a failure on his administration.
Bush might have spoken 6 times to Al Arabiya, and maybe Obama spoke once in the very beginning, but certainly no one spoke to Al Jazeera.
It's a little perplexing because he came in with an enormous amount of goodwill towards the Arab press in general, but towards Al Jazeera in particular. Several important layers of his administration have spoken to Al Jazeera. In his first term, Clinton did, Robert Gates did, even Joe Biden did. But that's where it stopped.
So they do have something to say to the Arab.
They recognize the importance of the Arab press in general. They recognize the importance of Al Jazeera in particular in terms of its audience.
And Al Arabiya.
Whether in the Middle East or in Africa. Well, the perception is that the animus is towards Al Jazeera more than anybody else. The argument that they have been giving us is probably similar to what they've been giving other Arab outlets, including Al Arabiya, which is when the time is right. So it's been 5 years now. Tremendous, monumental events have happened in terms of US interests in our part of the world. So I'm still not sure what that, time is right sentence actually means, although he still has 2 years and hopefully he'll see the light.
Should we expect him to speak to, the Arab world, especially in light of all the blunders and the successes, let's say, that he did
I
there?
tell you, it's not the president, by the way, who decide which interview to give to which outlet. It's the people who are around him. And let me tell you something. With the 6 interviews I did with President Bush, I worked very hard for them. And the difference is, every time there was something, I remember in 2005, I think, the Syrians were withdrawing from Lebanon, and I thought this is a good time to ask for an interview, and I did, and the White House responded. I think the difference is the people around President Bush and the administration understood the value of the message, understood that even when you have a big mistake, like with Abu Ghraib in Iraq, or something good that's happening, or something bad with the peace process, that the president wants to talk directly to the people in the Arab world. The Obama administration people are different. They see it differently. They see their agenda primarily domestic. And they think that the president has a great narrative when he went to Cairo, and people liked him anyway, so why do we go out of our way and explain things, despite the fact that President Obama was amazing. He can handle any question, you can talk to him about any topic.
What happened to that idea of winning minds and hearts in the Arab and Muslim world?
Look, quite frankly, this administration is having a hard time winning hearts and minds here in the US. And with the colossal amount of change and challenges that, it has to contend with in the Arab world, particularly over the last 3 years, I wouldn't be surprised if the decision is that Arab winning hearts and minds take a secondary position. And if I may say this, my experience is that they do understand how crucial it is. The people around Barack Obama, they do understand how crucial it is to talk to the Arab media. Why it doesn't happen for them to actually offer him to the Arab media is almost perplexing to me, as the fact that he's spent 5 years saying no more wars in the Middle East, and then suddenly there's going to be a war which my successor will inherit.
It's a mystery.
It's a mystery. And he has every interest in helping people, particularly in the Arab and Muslim worlds, understand the mystery. The best way to do it is to talk to the Arab press here in DC.
Directly.
Since 9/11 in particular, the Arab press presumably has become more important, right? Not less important.
Absolutely. 80% of American foreign policy, guess where? It's in the Arab and the Muslim world.
What is it going to take to get him to speak to those at the receiving end of American power?
You would think that because of 9/11, the need would be much greater for any US administration to talk to people in the Arab world through the Arab press. But he would also think that the Arab press would be much more focused on Washington. Proportionally speaking, the Arab press corps in Washington is still very small for what the region actually represents in terms of the broader scheme of US interests in the world. There's a two-way street. The Arab world is at fault, they are at fault. But that doesn't explain the mystery.
It's also individualism. I mean, you need to show up at the White House. I fault the Arab journalists more than the White House because they're not there. I mean, the White House is open. This is a democracy where you have a briefing every single day at the White House, at the State Department.
Do you know what they tell us? They don't get to ask questions.
No,
they don't get to have access.
If they don't know you if you're sitting in your office. You have to show up, and if they take you seriously, if you're a professional journalist who are asking the right questions. Now, they don't give you all the information you wanted, obviously, but I remember once Jay Carney said, the previous White House spokesman, he said, even the best informed journalists in Washington only know 10% of what's happening in the White House, and that's true, okay?
If we make a bet, what's going to be your bet on in the next 2 years? He will or he will not come down to it and speak and answer questions and follow-up questions and hard questions from Arab Journal?
I think he will, for sure he will.
Particularly at a time when the region is going through such turmoil with unscalable implications for the United States. He needs to do it.
He has a lot to answer for.
Sure, but with 200,000 dead, you know, Rwanda never again, the Holocaust never again, and now you're having it, it's happening every day.
On this note, thank you.
Our international audience is very important to us. We deeply value the relationships we have with the foreign press.
You can't walk into the White House itself. You really can't just freely walk around the complex. If you look behind me, there's the West Wing. Can't go in there. There's this little path right there, and then you can go into the press room. You really only have the press briefing to ask questions for most journalists, except for a few of the favorites. The New York Times gets the security leaks. The Washington Post gets any sort of government leaks. Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal gets any sort of economic news. So it's not just about the reporter that's sitting here. It's about what they can give the administration. But quite frankly, I can't remember the last time actual news was made from the White House podium. How can you be a journalist? You have to try and make sources and play the Washington game and get people to leak. But the problem in the last two administrations is these people are loyalists.
So just how can the foreign media access the inner sanctum of the White House if it's not able or willing to play the game? I joined up with a group of international journalists, political and White House correspondents, to try and find out. Presumably, you're all first-rate journalists. But I wonder if, as foreign reporters, you feel like you are second-class, third-class, fourth-class citizens at the White House.
Well, if you get to the White House, we don't even get to the White House, so where does that put me? 6th or 7th down the list. We used to, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation used to go to briefings, but we don't bother anymore. We can't get our foot in the door. It's not worth our time.
Second class? You're European.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, but that doesn't help. Doesn't help always. When I get invitations to White House events and it says at the bottom, you have to reserve, but space is limited, I know I will never get a spot because they prefer U.S. media.
So the Russians and the Indians have better access to...
I don't know. I wouldn't...
Do you, Andre?
I don't have a hard pass.
I cannot complain. We've had a couple of on-camera interviews with the current president. We had 2 or 3 with the previous one. I feel I'm getting what I need to get out of those briefings, out of those events.
You guys never got any one-on-one with the president, did you?
No, we got 2 interviews. PTA got 2 interviews in the last 6 years. Yeah. As a wire correspondent from India, means we do get what we want to get.
How do the 2 other veto members of the Security Council fare, UK and China, I guess?
If they want to have some message delivered to a specific target audience, a Chinese audience or UK audience, they will look for us. But yeah, I don't feel that that's the wrong way. That's just how democracy functions. It's understandable.
Access, as it's played by a lot of American media, is a recipe for very timid journalism. And the best access we ever got was when we broke the Edward Snowden story. You know, there was no shortage of people wanting to talk to us in the White House. And I think the point is that when you're setting the agenda yourself as a journalist, you don't have to go cap in hand to people.
But Dan, I just want to take you up on, you know, the access to the White House, because my problem is even getting interviews that we require that are important, and it's not a fact of going cap in hand. For example, we had been trying trying for quite a long time to get an interview with an Assistant Secretary of State about ISIS, about Islamic State.
And Australia is a member, supports American...
Exactly, we are an ally. And the only way we got that interview, and it was 15 minutes, was because the reporter in Australia approached the US ambassador in Australia begging for that interview to happen, and the State Department relented here. That's the kind of stuff that I think didn't happen when I was here last, which was between the end of 2001 to 2005.
Are you saying that the Obama administration is less responsive?
Yes, I think they want more control. They don't let people talk as much as the Bush administration did. That's the sense that I get.
As people say it, Obama, no drama. I mean, he's really trying to control. There's no drama at all. Until now, he hasn't done any on-camera interview with any Chinese media. It's because the U.S.-China relation is just so complex. He doesn't want to mess up. That's just Obama, no drama.
I genuinely think this isn't a foreign domestic media issue. I think this is a White House communications issue. He does a lot of kind of short, very tightly controlled TV spots. Genuine questioning of the president is extremely rare.
I mean, it does make sense. If they don't have something to tell you, they're not going to sit down with you. If they don't have a message to relay, well, it's just going to be ignored. And if they have something to say, it will have to be controlled. Is that the experience you had?
Even though Obama may have more style, Bush had more order. He did the pre-event interviews. He always was very courteous and welcoming and gave everyone his turn. So it played with him. I think the current team, one of the major components of their success was this harnessing of social media. Primarily for financial support. I think they decided that they could use the same thing to communicate directly with the people, over the heads of the journalists.
With the advent of social media and the way the White House and other governments of the world have been using the social media, there's more dissemination of news, right? There's more information flowing from the leaders directly. So it's another way of communicating to the people, which has added a new dimension to it.
And that changes the game dramatically, because the boundaries between domestic and foreign press increasingly make no sense. The media is not a one-way street anymore. It's not simply us telling the reader or the listener what to think. And I think it's for us to be distinctive, add value in that world, rather than just kind of go, well, they're cutting around us. Well, guess what?
I think this is like one of the most important points that we can make here, and that is that there is no single truth, not in this world. And I've heard from the administration officials, not necessarily at the White House, in charge of the public diplomacy, for instance, saying, our facts are facts, your facts are fictions. If you approach this public diplomacy business from this side, there can be no dialogue and there can be no trust to anyone who takes that position.
This administration promised to be the most transparent and open. And when they have events and they only let their own photographer in and they don't tell people about it until after the event, that's not open.
It's not open, is it, Stefan?
Well, it is open. It is more open than other countries, and of course every...
Stefan, you're supposed to say, no, it's not open. Come on.
No, it is open, but everything is relative, right? There's an amazing amount of expertise, non-official expertise in this town. As I said, you can tell stories here without having the White House or even the government as a source.
The level of leaking we're seeing, although fought back with some really quite aggressive strategies from the administration, is proof that people within government, if they hear a disconnect between what they're saying publicly and what they know is going on in private, they leak. They tell the world.
Shingo, you have something?
When you go to, no matter it's White House, it's State Department, or it's Pentagon, they will give you the exactly same answer. And it's just not, it's even word by word.
Having served here for a long time, I know that in the beginning of every administration, you have a huge influx of journalists. Everybody is interested, everyone wants to be there, fishing for chances and stuff like for access. Then at the end, like now, half of the briefing room is empty.
The briefing room of the White House was established under Harry Truman when there were 3 networks and 3 newspapers. Now today we have, I don't know, hundreds of outlets and not only domestic but also international. Then you have the online publications. There's a huge crowd of journalists. The guys who are able to ask a question, they repeat the question. You read the transcripts later and you find the same question over and over again because each one wants to be on camera for his or her network. So this is a pointless operation.
But do we agree that none of you get access to ask questions during those White House?
What, with the president?
With the president?
I've been here for 18 years. There was one occasion at the G8 summit where President Bush offered me a question.
This is what we
and
call...
was it prearranged?
No.
This is what we call the exception that confirms the rule.
Absolutely.
No, there have been several instances in the last 6 years where I have been here. He has asked, let foreign correspondent to ask questions. Even in the briefing room, means if you see the last 6 years, the frequencies which the press secretary lets the foreign correspondent ask questions has increased. But if you take a larger picture, if you're only focusing on this administration in the White House in isolation, then yes, there are a lot of questions to be answered. But we see other foreign leaders, how do they give access to the foreign press? In which country of the world a foreign journalist sits around 50 meters away from the leaders, right? Can you name anyone?
We need to also remember that the others don't advertise their being the model of openness and transparency.
Or do they feel that you are friends or foes in this formula?
I think they treat us like foes, but I think to their cost.
To their cost?
To their cost. A confident government, a confident country uses the media as a tool of maximising its reach, its influence, and this government is doing the opposite.
Are they frightened of us, though, or...?
I think they're...
Or just indifferent?
I think they're not sure of their message. I mean, what is Obama's Middle East policy? Who knows? I don't think he does. I mean, that's the problem. I don't think they haven't worked out a message. We're just a symptom of that.
I guess it's just President Obama's personality. I mean, according to his own former defense secretary,
Leon Panetta?
Yeah, he said he is like a professor. He has to reason in what's going on here and then make a conclusion and then move. So it's pretty understandable that we can see that you think twice whether I should be interviewed.
He's dangerous, though. I think part of the reason they started bombing Iraq was because 6 weeks before the midterm election, he said in an off-the-cuff moment in a press room, I don't have a serious strategy. And these things rebound, and his advisors and officials run around trying to kind of cover up for these throwaway remarks. He is quite...
But then the Bush administration, ran into far more blunders than the Obama administration in the Middle East.
Maybe if you make enough blunders, people stop listening. Maybe that's the answer.
Well, on that note, thank you, really.
Thank
so
you.
much.
We enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
When we come back, we meet with Jim Risen.
Do you think you should go to jail?
I will if I have to.
How do White House insiders look at the free press and the national security state?
Major media no longer has an interest in covering the really important stories because they don't sell.
Join us at the crossroads of power and the media, and I have something to say to you in my final thoughts. All of that and more after the break. Thomas Jefferson wrote,
"Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter."
The First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press. And the United States does have a remarkably free press, especially when compared to anywhere else in the world. Still, if we compare it to an ideal, we see big media, big money, and revolving door from government to the TV to corporations and back again. We see an elite out of touch with the real world, but very much in touch with each other, with power and advancement. Once, the media landscape in America seemed heroic. The Sundance Kid himself starred as an intrepid reporter. But the landscape has changed, as have the people. I caught up with Janine Waddell, an anthropologist from George Mason University, author of Unaccountable: How Elite Power Brokers Corrupt Our Finances, Freedom, and Security. So as the media is being gutted, journalists have to earn a living.
Right.
They're making their way from journalism to PR.
Right. What's happening is because we have the 24/7 news cycle, they have to fill all the time. The networks have to fill the time. So who do they fill it with? Shadow lobbyists. And so these are people who may be identified as their former title, former chief of Homeland Security, former head of NSA, former this, some former prestigious title. But in fact, what isn't said is that that person now has agendas. But what this creates is an information problem, because we think he's playing on our team, but in fact he may not be.
But media is supposed to hold everyone else accountable.
Media is supposed to hold everyone else accountable, but let's look at what has happened undeniably in the last few years. There's been a gutting of traditional media. That has happened in parallel with the digital, the advance of the digital age. And then also news is to a large degree now dictated by everybody's consumer choices. So all the major networks and news outlets have cut back dramatically on investigative reporting.
Give the example.
When the president took office, he committed this administration to being the most transparent ever.
What happens when a real-life modern journalist acts like one of the reporters in fiction, fearlessly seeking the truth, refusing to reveal his sources, and doing whatever is necessary to get it in print? Your job has been, to a large degree, to reveal the truth about misuse of power. Can you do your job as an investigative reporter in Washington, government feeding you information notwithstanding, without having confidential sources?
Well, you can discuss it, but you can't find anything out.
Information.
You can't get any real inside information. We actually, in our Constitution, have it written as the First Amendment to protect the press and to protect freedom of expression. And what we are now doing what the government is now doing, cracking down on whistleblowers and press freedom in the United States, I think is sending a very bad message to the rest of the world, which used to look to us as a model. I mean, I have been saying for the last few months that I think Obama's record on press freedom is clear, and that he is one of the greatest enemies of press freedom in at least a generation. And I think it's become a general consensus among journalists that this administration is one of the most secretive in modern history, and that and it's part and parcel of the way they've been conducting the war on terror.
You think this is the rule of the law, or this is just ruling by laws?
The government is using old laws like the Espionage Act in a way that I don't think they were meant to be used, to go after whistleblowers. I mean, the Espionage Act was supposed to go after spies, and instead they're going after whistleblowers, and they've attempted prosecutions of more whistleblowers than ever before, than all previous administrations have ever done. That's why I think it's so important to get the American people to understand that, and to look at the issues of abuse of power, and to realize that when the government cracks down on whistleblowers and targets reporters, that what they really are doing is they're trying to stop from being embarrassed, stop from politically damaging things coming out, and it's not really about national security.
Well, certainly more damage has been done by secrecy than by revealing secrets.
There's no evidence. I can't think of a single story since 9/11 that's in any way really hurt American national security. I think it's the government cries wolf constantly.
Is that why the New York Times published all sorts of stories on the front pages supporting the government's narrative, and did not publish the likes of your stories at all, or publish them in the backside of the paper?
The paper at first agreed not to publish the stories.
Caved in.
Right. And then about a year later, when I had my book, State of War, ready to go, they published the stories.
So they didn't publish it because it was right before the elections, but they still didn't publish it even after the 2004 elections?
Right. Yeah, they killed it twice. The reason was the same each time. It was the government told them there was it would damage national security.
But if I understand correctly, at one point you were subpoenaed, but then that was buried because it passed a year and so on and so forth. But
that was later. I got subpoenaed in 2008 for my book, State of War. And then that subpoena there were a lot of legal procedures going on over the next year. And while they were still going on, Obama was elected. At that point, I thought that they were going to, since Obama was now in, I thought they were going to drop the case. But instead, they renewed the subpoena in 2009 and then kept renewing it several times. And still coming after me.
Do you think you should go to jail?
No, I'd rather not. But I will if I have to.
How do you like my new entrance music? I recognize that the press and I have different jobs to do. My job is to be president. Your job is to keep me humble. Frankly, I think I'm doing my job better.
Every year, those tasked with keeping the president humble are invited to a special correspondence dinner hosted by the commander-in-chief himself.
Here I am.
The cozy relationship between political power and the media is a laughing matter.
The media really ticks me off. The way they try to embarrass me by not editing what I say.
I've been studying the White House and the press since the 1970s. The breakdown with Obama and his press conferences, he's had 112. Well, I came in, President Ford was in office, and then I was here throughout the Carter administration, part of the Reagan administration, George H.W. Bush, and then Clinton, Bush, and Obama. One of the things that you see with all those presidents is everybody hates the press. It's a lot easier to think that you have press problems when in fact you have political problems. I think people come here thinking it's a crown jewel, but it's far less of that than people want because it's difficult to get information. But for a lot of reporters, it's not quite the beach you think because they expect it is going to be so good, but you see the president far less than you think you're going to. And you also see senior White House officials a lot less than you would want. And you see them when they want to see you.
If there was a day where we came to work and you guys weren't pushing for more access, you wouldn't be doing your job. So we value the feedback we get, we value the constructive nature of our relationship, and we always are working to provide more access.
With every president comes a White House press secretary, the individual assigned to stand in front of the world's media to deliver the message and take the shots. I asked former press secretaries of the Clinton and the Obama administration, Joe Lockhart and P.J. Crowley, to give us the inside track on what really goes on between the White House and the media. How do you see the relationship today between government and the media in America?
I mean, there's tension that is built into the relationship, and I think it's creative tension.
It's healthy.
It absolutely is healthy. You know, the media is called the fourth estate. It is there to hold government to account. I think for both of us who stood at podia at the White House and the State Department and explained U.S. policy and U.S. actions to a domestic audience and a national audience, we understood that that was a manifestation of government, trying to be accountable to its people and others about what it was doing at home and abroad.
Is tension an understatement?
It's not so much tension, but there's no trust anymore between them because both sides, for good reasons, suspect the motives of the other. Where in fact, 30, 40 years ago, there was a there was a sense that while you would argue and fight over things and there was tension, that both sides ultimately were rooted in the public interest. And that's totally gone now.
From government standpoint, the other change in the environment is in terms of politics in a city like Washington, D.C., it's the idea of a nonstop political campaign. And so both sides are jockeying to see whose narrative will, to use a term that we used to use at the White House, break through.
For someone like me, who comes from the outside, is sort of a student of American politics, but comes from the outside, looks at a situation with a bird's eye view. What do I see? What I see is journalists going to jails, whistleblowers going to jails, and the people who brought about huge financial disasters to this country, huge foreign disasters for this country, none of them are accountable. Only the journalists and the whistleblowers. Well, that's what I see.
Well, I'd suggest you look a little harder. I think you're basing your entire theory on what you call a whistleblower, but who a court of law made the decision was a criminal. Because the law is clear.
No, I'm saying something else. I'm saying just when the country is facing these huge challenges on the foreign front and on the economy front, but when we need free press, you are going after the free press.
There is a free media. The United States just suffered its most significant classified leak in history. What Edward Snowden did in terms of providing highly classified information about ongoing intelligence operations was as serious a breach as we've ever suffered. The journalists who have very effectively reported on those subjects won Pulitzer Prizes. Not one of them is in jail.
No, but the evidence is that any threat of prosecution and the continued campaign against whistleblowers and against people like Jim Risen will, of course, continue to exert that kind of pressure and that kind of fear in the hearts of people who want to attempt the same. We're not going to be able to get to the bottom of things without confidential sources.
There is no campaign against journalists in the United States today.
The big corporations that own the big media in this country, the ABC, the CBS, the NBC, and so on and so forth, these big corporations have interest in good relationship with government, not interest in having bad relationship with government.
No, what they have more than anything right now is an interest in keeping viewership and selling advertising. There are threats around the world that are incredibly real, and we've spent a week talking about a guy who jumped the White House fence. The problem isn't that major media doesn't have access to covering really important stories. Mm-hmm. For me, the problem is the major media no longer has an interest in covering the really important stories because they don't sell.
The question here is, a lot of the people I talk to who care about America, who are patriotic Americans, they just think that the health of the nation today is being compromised by a rising lack of accountability, by a rising small elite with more powers, more money, more influence than ever, and it's becoming less accountable than before. And that's what they're talking about, the health of the nation.
And you know what? The old system didn't work perfectly either. The old system was a bunch of people who were white males, rich, who went to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. And they talked to people. And hung out with the Metropolitan Club with politicians. Yes, and they went and they would talk about what the news was with a bunch of white males working in government who went to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. But there was a sense that there was a public trust, that we were in this together. We were in this to make sure that this country stayed on the right path. Now we're in a system where it is egalitarian. The craziest person in the world can say something. And
I just so I can. I think I missed you right here. You said there was trust. Is that a good thing for journalists and politicians, for the leaders of the country and the leaders of the main media to dine and wine together?
No, what I'm arguing is it's a good thing for people in government and people in the media to understand that there is a common good. There is an idea of what American democracy is about, and it's not about just selling the next paper, or it's not about just getting your guy reelected.
But shouldn't there be a division of labor where one exercises power and the other probes power?
Well, let's both sides exercise power. The media exercises enormous power in this country. The primary focus now...
Joe, the New York Times cannot send you to jail. The New York Times cannot kill you. The New York Times cannot raid your house. The New York Times cannot do a lot of things.
Yeah,
Government can.
Okay, the New York Times can make sure you don't get reelected.
Cannot start wars.
The New York Times can ruin your stock price. The New York Times has enormous power.
President Obama did one interview with one Arab journalist on January 26 or 27, 2009. And he said, more to come. Zilch, zero, nada, nothing came for 6 years.
I mean, President Obama did the Al Arabiya interview in 2009.
January 26, his first week in office.
In anticipation of his speech in Cairo in June of that year. It's not that the administration stopped communicating in the Middle East. A lot of that responsibility passed from Barack Obama, to Hillary Clinton, who did interviews with Al Jazeera and other Arab media.
She did listening tours.
Every time, she went, to the region. But a president is also the closer. He's not the day-to-day manager of foreign policy. That's the responsibility of the Secretary of State. There's a day-to-day competition within the White House staff, across several policy realms as to what is going to occupy his time.
PJ.
The fact is the president doesn't do a lot of media, period.
PJ.
He doesn't do a lot of domestic media. He doesn't do a lot of foreign media, except in set pieces at various
PJ, you want to tell me during 6 years, after thousands upon thousands of people have died, American troops are deployed, American airplanes are bombing, American diplomacy is at hand, the president doesn't have 1 hour to spare to those people who are at the receiving end of his orders? That's what you're telling me?
I think I'll defend PJ here, which is, I think all those people you're talking about have a very real sense of where the president is, and it's just a sign of the time.
What's the sense? Tell me, what is it, Joe?
I think the reason you asked us here was because we have some sense of how the president uses the media to deliver a
we're not
message.
talking about foreign media.
But as Joe said, the foreign media and the domestic media have very similar access to the president.
But at the White House, you would never call on an Arab journalist or a journalist from Pakistan or India for that matter, never. In the White House, the CBS, NBC, CNN, New York Times people, they answer the question, they send the story. Why doesn't the President of the United States sit down with those who are at the receiving end of American
I have a suggestion. Walk out the front door, go down about 3 blocks that way. You can go in, you can raise your hand, and you can ask the president's spokesman.
No jumping fence, though.
You don't jump the fence, get cleared in. You can ask that question.
That's a great advice. Thank you, gentlemen. Wonderful. That's yesterday and today. What about tomorrow? Will the next generation of reporters follow in the footsteps of James Risen, or will they be the sort of people who play journalists on TV, courting power in order to get more face time? So why have you become journalists exactly?
This industry is in need of a voice from somebody who served. There's not enough voices like mine that are in this industry. That's why I'm here.
I think a powerful, well-told story can be one of the greatest agents of change in the world, to change government policy, to change the human condition.
Do I get the impression that all of you are going to be political journalists?
I would ideally like to do wartime.
War?
Yeah.
You want to go be a war correspondent?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Why?
The adrenaline, and you get to experience these things firsthand. And again, it goes back to the ethical questions of, when you see like a starving child, like, do you go save the child or do you stand by him and report? Those are the questions that I constantly seek answers to.
Rob, what is the problem with covering wars in America, from your experience?
From my experience, I have to say, you have people that are going there for the wrong reasons. So you're at this institution, Columbia University, to get an education that is not accessible to 99% of the world, so that you can go overseas and cover war and get an adrenaline rush. when there are people.
That is largely simplified.
Well,
Wow,
but I will
relax
say,
there.
and I will finish my statement when I will say that there are people who are over there doing that, serving wars, because they have no other options but to do it. I was one of those people. I had no other option but to join the military, to get a chance to get a chance to go to school, to get a chance to go to school, and to do all.
So, like, are you saying you went into the military just so you can get this 1% education?
I went in the military so I can get a better life, yeah.
You know, from my experience, short as may be, but we started with the 2003 war in Iraq and how that was sold. And now everyone seems to be excited about ISIS, the evil, and now we have to go and, get them. Nothing's changing, really. I mean, it's just, no one is learning anything from anything, it seems.
I can never bring myself to watch the beheading video.
Yeah.
And I would wonder, why would you want to put that image in your head?
That's the most, gruesome and brutal effect of war. And you're not there, but you get to, you get to watch it on television. I mean, I watched it.
Well, you're safely removed from the real effects.
And how much does the media, or how much should the media remove the audience from those effects? I think that's a
really
big
good
discussion,
question.
especially when you talk about American media. How much should we protect our audience, and how much are we disservicing them by protecting them from certain content?
The power of being able to publish just immediately, it's a huge change in the way news and media operates. It's a system that's open to irresponsible use.
Because of this influx of voyeuristic gossip news, the media, even mainstream, very well-respected media, has fallen victim to this idea that we need to make everything entertaining for everyone, and it's like a slow-moving train wreck, right? And I think that there's a huge ethical problem that exists there.
Is this what we're doing? Are we competing downwards instead of competing upwards?
It's also a question of breadth versus depth nowadays. And I think as much as you can blame the media or the gatekeeper or the corporate interests, you also have to blame the public, because there's a supply because there is a demand, and it goes both ways.
So, 5 years from now, how many of you are going to be working in D.C.?
Hopefully.
1, 2. Where are you going to end up, Rob?
Oh, God, who knows?
You're going to get close to power or not? You're going to start probing some of those generals that you worked for before?
I think eventually I'll run for office, but there's some things that
a traitor! There's a traitor amongst us. Well, great having you.
Thank you.
See you again in Washington. Or in the wars and the battlefields of the Middle East.
I'll be there.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank
you.
What would you ask the President of the United States if you got into that building? Well, legally, of course. Is everyone entitled to their own facts? Should Jim Risen go to jail? We do want you to be part of that conversation. And we've set things up so you can be, by joining us on Facebook, Twitter, and the rest. We want comments, criticism, and your ideas for future shows. So please, go ahead, join us. Join the conversation.